What's hot at Apple's Worldwide Developer Conference?
And where are the cracks appearing in Apple's walled garden?
Vertical Hold is proudly brought to you by Aussie Broadband, changing the game with their award-winning network and Australian-based support.
Hi there. Welcome to Vertical Hold Behind the Tech News, the tech podcast where we catch up with Australia's leading technology journalists to dive into the big tech stories of the week. I'm what's left of the voice of Alex Kidman.
Valvoline.
This is my love song dedications after dark voice. And I'm joined by a man who's considerably healthier than I am, so much healthier, in fact, that he's already had his first COVID jab. Hey, Adam, is it true what they say about the COVID jab? Did it really give you better Donkey Kong skills?
Oh, absolutely. Although it might just be Bill Gates' microchip talking, but I would definitely say I haven't cracked my high score yet, but I'm getting better and my 5G reception is improving. So I reckon one more jab should do it.
We're also joined once again by Jennifer Dudley-Nicholson from News Corp, someone else who's also had their first COVID jab. I'm sensing a theme here. And if COVID jabs could, in fact, give you wacky but not entirely useful superpowers, which one would you want?
Maybe I'd like the ability to just occasionally be able to cope well with like a 3 a.m. wake up call where I had to pay attention to what was on the screen, because that stuff is hard. If that could be a superpower, I'd like that.
That's the caffeinated COVID jab, isn't it?
Yeah, well, maybe if we could, dial it all into ongoing caffeine in a jab, so you don't have to keep, going to America to get yourself some caffeinated gummy bears. Sure.
Or 5G wireless caffeine. Now you're talking.
Oh, you've combined my two favorite things. Yes, let's go and do that.
And while we are joking about vaccinations, if you do have the opportunity to go and get vaccinated, people, go and do it. Get your vaccine when you can. And the reason, of course, that Jen is talking about 3 a.m. starts is that this week in tech news was pretty much all about Apple and its Worldwide Developer Conference, which kicked off in Australia here at 3 a.m. And some of us were unfortunate enough to be awake at that time. Now, Jen, it had been rumoured that, like a lot of WWDCs previously, we'd see new hardware emerging. I've actually got a little clip from the developer conference to play here, which I'll kind of intro as such. So Tim Cook, how much new hardware did you announce at WWDC 21?
Nothing! Absolutely nothing!
Jen, we saw this with Google I.O. as well. Is it a problem that Apple didn't do this?
Oh, it's a problem for us. We just want some shiny stuff to focus on when we're up at 3 a.m. Just give me some smart glasses so I could be excited about life. I like software, sure. I like free upgrades. These are all good things. But I also like looking at shiny things and imagining a future where I'm not just awake at 3 a.m. to talk about features. It's a selfish thing, I know.
I think it's fair enough. So it was an all singing, all dancing software show. So we should kind of dive into that. The iPhone, of course, drives so much of what Apple does, both the money into its huge money bins, but also a lot of its development strategy. And we've got iOS 15 coming. Adam, they talked a lot about this thing called Shareplay. So what's Shareplay for those playing at home?
Well, it's a familiar concept that you've perhaps come across with other services. It's basically a very COVID-friendly idea of you and your friends want to be able to watch something online at the same time, even though you're not in the same place. So you can share a link that means you can click it and all be in sync and not do it the old-fashioned way, which is the way I've done it a few times. I've got my Disney subscription and shared it with my brother-in-law and my sister-in-law so we could all watch Disney movies at the same time whilst talking to each other over Skype, which works better than you'd think, actually, when you really don't have another choice. But this is Apple's way of doing it. And it doesn't just work with Apple's own services, which is interesting as well. Jen, what did you think about the way it works?
Well, I'm just interested that you're actually doing this and you're sort of doing the whole, watch party from afar business.
I'm in Melbourne. Did I forget to mention that? I haven't done it
this year. Issues. You might have heard about them.
Haven't done it this year, but we did it last year.
A couple. Yeah, look, I mean, I'm all for, sharing thoughts about stuff that you're watching, but normally I just do that over Twitter and become angry about reality TV shows. Hopefully, when, the times align and I'm not actually on daylight savings times, because that's a particular Queensland issue. I was interested that they were going for this though, and I mean, it seems like an okay idea if you're into that sort of thing and into having watch parties from afar and in lockdowns and what have you. But I think it's going to present a few issues in terms of, are you a subscriber to this? Are you not a subscriber to this? Can we watch it on this platform? Where is this thing available? So I don't know how many people are going to use it, to be honest.
Yeah, it's like Apple has seemingly kind of reinvented the watch party here. It's interesting to note the way it was presented in the keynote almost made it seem like you were setting up this kind of magical FaceTime call, which was also sending the video through, which is not the way it works. Everyone who is watching along with you has to have their own rights to whatever the content is, and it has to support SharePlay. And then what you're really doing, it seems to me, is you're handing everyone in your watch group or family or whoever it is a remote control. Now, if everyone on the sofa has a remote control, nothing's going to go wrong with like playing or pausing or volume, is it?
No, I can't see any issues with that. I mean, and they won't be able to lose the remote control either. I mean, I do like the stuff around it being synced though. I think that's really important because, and also, I saw that recently with the new Apple TV where you can actually, they've got like a new feature where you can actually sync it up to your speakers and make sure that there's no lag and stuff like that. They do that quite well. But yeah, giving my son a remote control at the age of 7, it's not great.
The fact that it's limited to Apple hardware is a bit frustrating because, like a lot of people these days might have Apple TV Plus app on their smart TV, or now we know it's on the Google dongles and the Amazon dongles. So there would be a lot of people watching perhaps Apple services because there are things they want to watch on Apple TV Plus, but don't feel like shelling out a couple of $100 for an Apple TV. They are left out in the cold. Everybody in this party has to have Apple hardware, but then they don't have to be necessarily watching Apple streaming service. It can work with Netflix or Disney or any other app as long as that app
I
developer
don't
has built it in.
I don't think they announced Netflix. In fact, I'm pretty sure they specifically didn't announce Netflix. They
What I
had
meant is it has
Disney
the
and they had
potential
Hulu and
to.
stuff.
So which
Yes,
ones
it's
did
got
they
the
say
potential.
it does?
They definitely name dropped Disney and
Yeah,
HBO Max and Hulu were the
yeah.
ones that immediately spring to my
So that's one
slightly
out of three
unwell
for
mind.
us.
But Netflix was the one where I thought,
Yeah,
now that's really interesting that they don't have them because they're such a big player, of
yeah.
course. But Adam, you mentioned that they have to have the Apple TV. Of course they do, because while WWDC is about developers and software, ultimately everything Apple does is tailored towards selling hardware. They're a hardware selling company. So if the end goal sells hardware, they're interested. And this sells hardware or could sell hardware.
Maybe I don't think so. I don't think during lockdown you're going to go to the trouble of buying an Apple TV if you could even get one, because we all know how hard it is to get certain electronic items during lockdown because everybody decides they need one. I think Apple could throw everyone else a bone here and just open it up to the wider Apple TV app
But then they
ecosystem.
sell less hardware. I mean, and I don't think Apple TV itself is all that important to them. But I suppose shifting onwards, there were other new features in iOS that were revealed. Jen, anything particular grab your attention as a shiny new thing that I want now?
I was really interested that because we've been talking, about future hardware that we could expect as well, and AirPods had certainly come up in that discussion. I was really interested that they were adding to that as well, and so that they were sort of creating something completely new and a new way to use AirPods. So that was something that I thought was fascinating, and some
What
of the
is that?
changes. Oh, so with AirPods, essentially, they decided to use computational audio and beamforming microphones to add something called Conversation Boost. With the idea being that when you're in a really crowded environment, you could potentially use this to boost the voices around you and the people that you're immediately speaking to face. Now, I'm not necessarily hard of hearing. However, there are people I know who really could do with that sort of technology, and I know that there've been some other companies who've kind of specialized in this and tried to create not quite a hearing aid, but a hearing assistant. I don't
Yeah.
know if there's a new a hearable, I believe that they're called.
Oh, some
I
marketing
know.
person's going to hell for that.
Well, there's a whole like category of device. So I think that those companies who are creating those are really going to hate this addition. But for people who are a bit hard of hearing, particularly in really noisy environments, I think that that was kind of a something that will be very useful for people and was kind of underplayed at WWDC. And
And
another
that's
thing that
me.
struck me,
Sorry, just before you go
yeah,
on, that's me. I have that exact problem. If you put me in a quiet room, I can hear a pin drop. I can hear things that other people can't hear. But when you put me in a noisy environment, I really struggle. And it's incredibly frustrating if you could be in a restaurant or a party and the person right in front of you that you're making eye contact with and you can see their lips and whatever, it's not too bad. But anyone who's sitting one seat across, like on the peripherals, it's really hard to engage with them. I never to the point where I would think, oh, I need a hearing aid or anything like that because I've had my hearing checked and, generally it is fine because
mm,
I've tested some of those other hearing things and they checked my hearing as part of it. But if I knew that, well, something like AirPods that I perhaps already owned, I'd love to switch on that feature and see how it goes. And because they're not too big, once you
mm.
explain to the person that you're talking to that you're not actually listening to the Rolling Stones, you are
I'm not on
actually
a call
talking to.
right
I'm
now.
not on a call right now. I'm actually really keen. That could be a real game changer for me because I find it so incredibly frustrating into not being able to talk to people in a noisy environment.
And not to be sexist or anything, but I have heard other people and scientist type people say that it can be something that happens with age to men in particular,
Mm.
where they can't discern who exactly is talking when there's a lot of people talking at once and those sorts of things.
Yeah.
So I think that could be really handy. And again, like free upgrade essentially in the stuff you already own. And the other thing that really interested me that kind of came at the start was FaceTime. Because there seems to be a
Mm.
lot of changes to FaceTime, including you mentioned the walled garden. There's a big crack in their walled garden for FaceTime because apparently they will let Apple users talk to those dirty Android people this time.
No, say it's not true.
It's true, and even Windows people. They
Oof,
could they could break them out of Teams and put them onto FaceTime.
property values will drop.
This is I mean there are still they can't actually initiate FaceTime calls as I understand it, but they can participate in them. And then if an Apple person initiates then the call, then even if that person leaves, then the two Android people can still talk to one another on an encrypted FaceTime chat over a web browser, which I thought was really interesting. And if we can do it with FaceTime, then potentially can we do it with iMessage in future? Let's do the whole thing.
Alex, doesn't this go against what you just said? Why are they letting people do that rather than saying, oh, all those people should go out and buy iPhones?
So I actually think this supports my argument. I
Here
don't
we
think it
go.
goes against it. Funnily enough, I saw
Strap
some
in,
astonishing.
people.
I saw some astonishing hype around the FaceTime thing. It's really interesting that they're doing it. Don't get me wrong, but I saw some
Yeah.
astonishing hype saying, "Oh, they're coming for Zoom. They're coming for Microsoft Teams. This is all about
They can have
getting people to do
Microsoft
big."
Teams.
Yeah, I knew you were going to say that, Adam. But no, I think this plays nicely into the buy Apple hardware because it lets those users peek over the hedge into the walled garden, just to strain that metaphor a little bit more, to see what it's like to be an Apple user in essence. Because the Apple users are the ones who have the power in this instance. They're the ones who can start the calls. They're the ones who can create the groups, who can create all of these things. Everyone else is sort of just along for the ride, but at the same time they can see, this would be easier if I was on an iPhone. This would be easier if I had an iPad. I'll go buy some Apple hardware. It's still just it drives back to the hardware. It's a really interesting step for Apple to take, but it's not an entirely surprising one either, because what we saw last year, for example, Zoom went through the roof. I mean, I think we were all using Zoom as tech journalists prior to that. I certainly was.
Yeah.
But last year, it just went consumer mainstream crazy because so many people were stuck at home. Apple had FaceTime before that, of course, but they didn't have a competing product that did the kind of things that it does. And FaceTime sort of still doesn't. But by opening it up, they can chip away at the armor a bit there. They can keep themselves in that kind of conversation while adding a few other funky things like I think focus filters and things like that they also announced. But they're still selling this superiority of Apple hardware story hard because they still get the best features and the smoothest experience. It's the same kind of thing as if you're running an iPhone through Windows, for example. If you're running an iPhone through a Mac, it's a drive, it's seamless, it works reasonably well. I'm not going to say it's flawless, nothing is.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're doing it through Windows, you're still on iTunes, which is almost as bad as Microsoft Teams, let's face it. So, because Apple wants to sell you more of its hardware, it wants you inside that walled garden. It's just allowing a few sneak previews in this instance.
Jen, do you think this is also a bit of a defensive move by Apple because people get dragged outside the walled garden? If you want to have a COVID chat with some family members and they don't all have iGadgets, well, then you use something, you find neutral ground. You go to Zoom, you go to FaceTime, Facebook Messenger, whatever. Do you think that they're realizing that by not letting people in, they're actually encouraging Apple people to leave?
I think so. And I think that, I mean, Google's benefited from a lot of that and Facebook, as you say. So people have gone to Facebook Messenger, even if they might not like it, because at least it's available. And also, like, there's a bit of a learning curve with Zoom. I mean, I'm sure, like most people, you guys have both had to explain what Zoom does to relatives who are a little bit slow on the uptake when it comes to these things. And my goodness, it's terribly painful to explain from afar how to set that up. Whereas FaceTime is a lot simpler, and I think it's just not getting the same amount of use because it does need to be within Apple. So I like the idea, though, that it's a gateway drug to more Apple devices, and I really hope that they market it that way. But yeah, look, this is definitely a pitch to kind of get more people using it and definitely get more people maybe liking it. And they also added a couple of things in there as well that I think were interesting because they said that you could use portrait mode in some cases, as if you have a device with an M1 chip in it, for example, and you're a Mac user. And it also has voice isolation, which I thought was really interesting because it's using the microphones on your device already. So potentially, if a cat was, say, using the litter box right beside my office, not everybody would have to share in that experience, which I really enjoy.
FaceTime, the first hit is free. Not long before WWDC, of course, Apple released its first M1 powered iPads, and we've also got a new version of iPad OS. And look, I was expecting some pretty big things out of iPad OS because of those M1 iMacs. Jen, do you think Apple delivered on that score in terms of new iPad features?
A little bit. So there's a lot more multitasking. And that's the big message that came out of iPad OS as far as I was concerned. They're trying to make it a bit more obvious because I think with a lot of the things that the iPad can do in terms of multitasking, people don't realize and don't remember how to access it. There's a lot of hidden features there that
It's kind of obscure in a lot of ways.
Yeah, it's one of those things where you either know or you don't. And is there a way to look it up? Probably not. Maybe you find out these things, on the streets when you're out with your mates talking about iPads. Never happens. So again, like the whole drug
When you're
culture
getting your
thing hasn't
FaceTime
crossed
fix.
over to iPad. So they've added like a new menu, as I understand it, so that you can click on that and you can sort of create different screens for the iPad, which kind of plays into this idea that it's got a lot more power with the M1 chip. And I quite like that. However, like a cynic would say, maybe there's a couple more iPads on the way and they're saving a little bit of juice for that. We didn't see a whole redesign, for example.
They've got new widgets.
There are new widgets, absolutely. There's a question about whether you can use the widgets on in portrait and landscape mode, which I'm sure people will find out when they download the betas and hopefully don't lose cut and paste like I did one year. And the widgets are good. Like I think that would be very useful on that screen, but it doesn't necessarily show the power of the device.
They've also got the whole new notes architecture thing, which is across iOS as well. The whole quick notes and live text, which actually we should have mentioned with iOS as well. This idea, which clearly we've never seen before, of OCR text coming out of things. Although, to give Apple its credit, it looks like it's fairly seamless, or should be fairly seamless. We will have to wait and see till we can throw it at some real live world examples, of course. But their whole idea here is building that notes thing out to be a more robust tool. Now, Jen, I know you're someone who's worked on, like done your daily work on an iPad. I've seen you do this at press
Mhm.
conferences. Is that something that you would find more useful on an iPad now than before?
I mean, it reminds me a little bit. I mean, yeah, I know what we were saying before with live text being a bit googly. The notes thing I found a bit Samsung Note-ish, where
Mm,
you could
yeah.
take something down quickly. And I think if people realize and remember what the shortcut is for that, that could be useful. But I don't think it's probably like an everyday work task type thing. I think that there are if you're working on a tablet, an iPad, you probably have an idea of what things you want to write in, what programs are your favorite to do that in already. So I don't know if it adds a heap. It's useful. I think live text might be more useful, but I don't know if it kind of makes the decision for you to buy an iPad rather than something else.
Are we getting closer to that point where Apple tries to convince us that you don't really need a Mac anymore because the iPad's a better productivity tool?
I don't know if they're continuing with that. However, the one really big thing that they did announce that could make things interesting is universal control. So they did this amazing demo. Craig Federighi, who basically ran the show this year, as well as all of the comedy skits as he does, they did this demonstration where using a Mac you could then literally drag and drop things over to an iPad, and you could do the same by dragging and dropping it over to an iMac, which makes a lot of sense when a lot of us are working from home, for example, and getting frustrated with devices. And I mean, AirDrop normally works in that respect, but in making it easier, I'm all for it. And there's also Sidecar kind of did something similar, but not quite. So this idea that you could control several devices with one, Lord of the Rings style, I'm quite for it if it works.
It's really cool looking technology. But Adam, to get back to your question about is it a replacement for a Mac, I think it deliberately isn't. And actually, the universal control plays into this as well. Because let's look at it. An M1 MacBook Air, the modern MacBook Air or MacBook Pro or Mini or iMac, all run on the same M1 chip that's in the new iPad Pros. It's not any different at all. It's literally the same silicon. So they could, in theory, run the same code. There should not be a problem there. They don't. And I think this is totally deliberate to get back once again to this idea of Apple wants to sell you more hardware. If it keeps the iPad a bit separate, if it says this is the thing that does those one or two multitasking tasks, it's portable, it's our touch and stylus interface version of the Apple experience, I won't call it the Mac experience, the Apple experience, then that's one thing. Your Mac is another thing. Universal control means it all feels like it's this big, friendly, walled garden experience. Then suddenly they've sold you two or three devices where otherwise they might have only sold you one. So it still sells more hardware, but it keeps them distinct.
But
I think they're
they've
going to try and keep that barrier up as long as they can.
but they've blurred the lines between Macs and iPads a lot, and often in the favor of iPads. And I think Mac users were getting nervous that they are now second class citizens or starting to look like second class citizens in the Apple universe, and it's the iPad that's the
Have you seen
darling,
the
and you get
sales
worried.
figures? This is what
Yeah,
people are buying. I mean, I think
but
Apple is
but my
they're a
point is,
business.
if that's what people are buying, I can see them. There will come a point where they'll try and convince you that your Mac would be better off running iOS. That's what I think people are nervous about, and it seems. I don't know, Jen. Do you get the feel? Because I got the feel from Apple that they were going that way. As you say, maybe not so much now, but I think long time Mac users who remember a world without iPads and smartphones, maybe still a bit nervous that it's going that way.
Back in my day, we
Yeah.
didn't even have apps. We used to put giant discs into the side of our machines. Um, I don't know. I'm kind of the same impression as Alex that they are still trying to keep them separate
Yeah.
to the point where of obstinance, really. Like can we please have a touchscreen on a Mac? Absolutely no, you can't, because that would be too confusing, because then you wouldn't buy an iPad. And I do think that they are still kind of trying to keep them separate. I will say though that like multitasking on the iPad, that special levitating smart keyboard business that makes the iPad so much more like a computer. They're getting
At a
closer.
price.
Well, at a price, certainly. But they're getting so much closer every time, but I think they're still deliberately keeping them apart.
And that deliberate thing, because we started to talk about macOS Monterey, the next version of macOS, that deliberate thing actually also extends in a very unusual way to what they're doing with Macs, because a bunch of the new features they've got, you will only get if you've got an M1 Mac. And it's a really odd little grab bag of things. So, like the live text feature, for example, and apparently all of this relates to the neural processing engine in the M1. This is Apple's call on it, that you need that neural processing engine to do all these features. So, live text, for example, maybe, although we've had OCR for decades, but maybe they've got a point there. But things like blurred video on FaceTime calls, apparently you can only do that with an M1. I mean, I'm sorry, but Google Meet and a bunch of other apps have had background blurring for years and years and years now, and they haven't needed anything more powerful. It also strikes me as very odd because Apple is still selling Intel based Macs. You will almost certainly be able to buy an Intel based Mac at the point when macOS Monterey comes out, and it'll be one that can do less.
That's why people need to listen to this podcast so they know to wait for the M1X or the M2 or whatever the hell it is when it actually comes out, so that they can get the latest and greatest. And honestly, like if you buy a 16-inch MacBook Pro this year, please wait. Just please wait until a new chip comes out, because it's coming.
But it feels a bit, I mean, maybe this is just me, it feels a bit brutal because that 16-inch MacBook Pro is still a very powerful machine. There are certain things where it out-churns the M1, where it outperforms the M1. And
But that's a sort of power machine that someone would buy who would want the M2 or the M1X or whatever it ends up being.
Fair. Yeah.
And that is something that it will, it will, I imagine, up, sort of increase in speed again. And that's why people have to wait for that. And I think a lot of people did get up at 3 a.m. to actually watch to see if there would be another chip announcement. But obviously, we're going to have to wait a couple more months for that one.
But I mean, some of the other features that only the M1s get, some of the new Apple Maps features, and admittedly, some of these are US specific because they've only got those fancy 3D renders for US cities right now. That's also M1 Mac. I mean, I don't get it. I don't get why you need that level of processing power when presumably what you are doing is pulling down map data to then draw up a picture of an overpass or whatever.
I'm not sure that we'll ever know. I mean, I will say though that like some of the new features that are coming out, like they go back like 6 generations of device. And so, or like some ridiculous number, so you can still get these iOS updates on devices that are quite old, and that's reasonably impressive because, especially in the Google Android world, like you get 3 years worth of support and then you're out of there. So while I wish that these, some of these things, as you say, especially the 3D maps, which look quite cool, I wish they were available on more devices. I actually do appreciate that Apple is doing kind of really wide support for devices that are older and people who just can't be bothered upgrading or can't afford it.
But it's such a sharp contrast. Like I think it's the iPhone 6S, if I'm remembering correctly, is in phones is the cutoff point for a iOS 15. And I agree with you. That's great that they're supporting
That's
it
an
that far
old
back.
phone
You
now.
will
That's
not
pretty
get,
good.
you will certainly not get all the features, and it'll be a fair amount slower. But it's there, and at least it's there from a security standpoint too, of course. But at the same time, we're talking, well, arguably not even a generation of Macs because they're still selling the Intel Macs. And there's the cutoff point there. So it'd be nicer. It'd be nicer if it was more uniform.
The transition was always going to be tricky. And, when people bought the first M1 Max as well, they had the difficulties where a lot of the things they had to run through an emulator as well. I think that these 2 years, I mean, just like when we switched over from, the 30-pin plug, which I still have some of, to, the Lightning plug, which apparently Apple will never get rid of.
Until the day they do.
Exactly. Like it's going to be a difficult transition, and this is just the slight difficulties that we're seeing now.
So we talked a little bit about kind of watch parties and so on. And Adam, I know you're a man who's very keen on TVs. What new things? What excited you with TV OS coming up?
Well, I think the big thing is spatial audio, although I don't know how excited I am about spatial audio. I don't think I'm as excited about it as Apple is. I don't know if anybody's excited about it as Apple is, but so that's the big thing, and we've heard about it for a while. They've now it's something that will work with Apple headphones with music and with video. So if you've got an iPhone in your Apple headphones and you're listening to Apple Music, any music that's been done in Dolby Atmos can then be listened to in this spatial format. So basically, what it means is if you turn your head, the music stays still. So if you close your eyes and the music's in front of you and you turn and look to your left, the music will seem to stay where it was. Whereas normally with headphones, as you move around, the music's always in the same spot because it's just coming from your left and your right.
As though the singer was on a stage in front of you, not just coming through
strapped
headphones.
to your head. Yeah.
Do not strap singers to your heads.
No.
They don't like it.
But and so also the same thing with if you're watching a video on an iPad or if you're watching a video on an Apple TV. And it works slightly differently because it knows that it's a slightly different viewing experience. Like if you're sitting on the couch and you're wearing like the AirPods Max headphones and you're watching the TV and you turn your head, it will keep the sound in the same spot. But if you stand up to go and, get a drink, then it detects that the headphones have moved and realize, okay, well, you no longer want the music to stay around. The audio. So the audio will switch back to the old way of doing it. On an iPad, it's a little bit different because the iPad can move. So you can move the iPad around or you can move yourself around. And again, it keeps moving the audio around to try and keep it in sync. Sounds a bit gimmicky to me. I kind of get the idea, but we've lived without it for a long time, and I've never felt like it was something that I desperately needed in my life. Jen, how are you sold on spatial audio?
I think it was very complicated for them to come up with this. Like this has taken
technically it's amazing.
A lot of nerds, a lot of time, and I do respect that. I mean, I've been having a play around with spatial audio with the what are they, the AirPods Max, the giant pillow like expensive headphones, and look, they're really comfortable, and I quite like the sound of it. Would I go and seek it out? I don't know. I'm still gonna just like ruin the songs by singing along to them anyway. However, I think it's a nice addition, and again, it's a free edition, so you don't, you can use this with devices that you already have, unless you're then treating them as a gateway, as Alex is probably going to say, and this is another pitch to get you to buy more stuff.
I was actually going to say that I think you accidentally said ruin when you meant improve songs there, Jen.
Oh, sorry.
But look, I sort of get it more with music though than with video.
Yeah,
because with music you could queue up, and there's so many great live albums, classic live albums, where I get this idea of, right, I can just close my eyes and imagine the band is in front of me, and if I do turn my head or whatever, great, they're still in front of me. I don't know that I'd want it switching on and off all the time, because I think we're all fairly attuned, whether we're in a cinema or if we're watching TV at home, to the audio space is this area, whatever you've got set up, whether you've got surround or not,
and it's consistent.
It's consistent, exactly. Yeah. And having that switch and change, I reckon, could be really, really jarring. In the same way, there's a few, the Samsung ones do it, and I think the new Sony ones do it as well, headphones that will do a quieter function if they work out you're talking with your music, which is a massive pain if, like Jen and myself, you sometimes sing along to the music that you're listening to.
Or if you ever cough or sneeze or anything.
Exactly, because it dims the music, and I worry that I'm going to, just kind of lean my head just the wrong way or whatever, or it's just going to decide, oh, you've moved, and suddenly the audio is going to go slightly wonky on me, and then I lose that immersion in what I'm watching. Yeah. And maybe that's just me, and obviously we still have to actually test this when the next version of tvOS appears.
And the frustration here with both the audio and the video is that it can't be applied. You can't do a virtual version of it to old content. Like you could take stereo content and run a stereo movie, run it through your home theater amplifier and create fake surround sound. Dolby Pro Logic, I want to say off the top of my head, is the way it does it. It listens to the stereo. It takes an educated guess, said some here, some there, and it's not as good as real surround sound, but it's not too bad. So it means when you're so it means if you switch from watching something in surround sound to watching something that's actually been produced in stereo. You don't lose that surroundness, even though it's not as good. But it can't do that same thing. It can't take a standard surround sound movie or a standard 2-channel audio and spatial audio it. Do you know what I mean? It can't virtually do that. So if you have a playlist in Apple Music of your favorite music, and some of it's being done in Dolby Atmos, so it can be spatial audio, and some can't. You're going to hear it switch between songs, and they're not going to. They have uh, apparently it only applies to 10,000 tracks at the moment, which sounds like a lot, but it's really not very much at all. And most of that would be new stuff. I don't know if they intend to go back and
They have
you know,
actually done quite a lot of old stuff from what I've seen. So like I had a bit of a look at the playlist today, and
Yeah.
they've actually gone through and done like, John Lennon gear and sort of, the Motown classics and what have you.
Okay.
Very disappointing that I haven't heard any Weezer in spatial audio. Massive flaw
There is
in the
one.
system.
I saw that
really?
somewhere. No, yeah. The Happy Days one.
Oh, okay, good. Buddy Holly.
Yeah, I can't. Buddy Holly. Yes, I saw that on the list, and I thought, I'll listen to that because I know that song.
See, I just figure they will be remastering Beatles albums till the end of time
Yes.
in every
and this is
format known to
another
man.
reason. Yeah.
And this is just another way to get you to pay for them. They also, I mean, speaking of things that you listen to and so on, one of the more interesting things, which I suppose breaks up in this walled garden approach again a little bit, is they opened up this idea that Siri might sit in devices that didn't have an Apple badge on them.
Ooh.
Yeah, it's interesting. And they actually said, so you can talk to your light switches. And like I talk to a lot of stuff around my house as it is. And sometimes I just talk to myself in various rooms when I'm looking for things. Apparently now they'll listen back. So that's promising. It makes me seem a little less mad.
But it's not as cracked up to be though, because if you've got, for example, Google's GG and Amazon's Lexi for people who don't want their smart speakers
Devices
triggered,
to start listening.
literally
Yep.
and metaphorically, that you can run them on something like a Sonos smart speaker, and it will run completely independently on that. You don't need any other Amazon or Google gear in the house. If you've got a light switch or whatever it is, I don't even know why they brought up with light switches, because that's a terrible thing. Because
Well, because
who talks
they
to
all
light
have to
switches?
have microphones and
But
speakers as
who
well.
builds microphones into light switches? Maybe
Well,
they're
people
around and
might,
I haven't
but-
seen. Maybe.
yeah,
But
people
anyway,
might.
if you've got a device, some kind of smart device that is now compatible with Siri, you still have to have a HomePod or something somewhere else in the house for it to route the commands back through. So it's good in that you don't have to have a HomePod or HomePod Mini for every room, but you still have to have some Apple gear. It's not totally independent of that Apple device in the other room.
It's almost shockingly as if Apple wants to sell
To sell
hardware.
hardware.
Here
Who
we
would
go.
Yes.
ever
You
have that
set
kind of
him up
crazy
for
idea?
this.
I did. And he knocked it out of the park.
However, just playing devil's advocate, it could be useful if you've got your one or two, for example, Apple devices, Apple HomePods in a different room, and then in a completely different part of the house, you want to turn on the lights, you want to talk to the light switch, you wish to do something else to control your smart devices. I'm not against it, but I do want to see what will actually be compatible with it, which Apple can't really say now because this is just their announcement to try to get developers interested in actually supporting it.
It feels to me like they're just playing massive, massive catch up here. You look at the US market and it's like 80% Amazon, I think it is.
Mhm.
Like Amazon's the big player, but for that reason, you get their assistant not just in their hardware either, in speakers and microwaves and ovens,
Fridges and
all
yeah.
sorts of stuff that you might think, why on earth do you need a voice assistant in that? But it's there. The
Mhm.
hardware is there. They've got an ecosystem. Google is trying to do this, and there are devices out there that will do that. And now you've got Apple saying, well, we've sort of got this licensing thing, which again, you'll presumably have to pay Apple for a, works with Siri badge or whatever,
Mhm.
or Siri inside, although Intel might get a bit cranky on that one. But
Siri
you'll
is
pay
listening.
Apple
Send
some
around the
money.
blue guys to beat them up.
Exactly. They'll just climb the sides of the walled garden. But it feels like to me like they're sort of just playing catch up, because while Apple's HomeKit is fine. I mean, all of these systems really are fine. You just tend to pick one, you set it up in your home, and if you're already massively HomeKit integrated, I could see the appeal of saying, right, well, I'll just make sure that Siri is available in more spaces in my home without always having to have my phone in my pocket or presumably wearing an Apple Watch. Although this does bring me on to one cool little tidbit, which I haven't seen in a whole bunch of places, which I was only made aware of post keynote, which is some of the really neat assistive stuff that they're throwing into their new software, and especially for the Apple Watch. The one thing that you would think you would need to make the most out of an Apple Watch would be hands, as in physical digits and so on. But or the ability to work with a touch screen and with the digital crown and so on. They're actually changing that in the next version of WatchOS, so it'll actually work with hand gestures. You'll be able to actually use your Apple Watch simply by clenching your fist or pinching your fingers together. For people who might have amputations or mobility issues, this kind of assistive stuff Apple does so well, and it's such a cool bit of technology to kind of see coming out.
I
It's
don't
interesting.
understand, and I don't mean to offend anybody, but I can't picture what you just said, because if I've got the Apple Watch on my left hand, and I'm missing my right hand, so I
Yep.
can't touch the screen, then I can't make the gestures you just said, and I can't make the gestures with my left hand because that's the hand that the watch is on, so it can't see
That
that
is the
hand.
hand that you make the gestures with. The point is,
So
you're
it's
wearing.
not look. It can't see the hand.
It's not. There's
It
no
can
camera.
tell. It can detect that you've moved
It
it.
is detecting the
Ah.
muscle movements in your arm and your fingers and so on.
I'm really glad we covered that because I just couldn't
totally.
visualize it. Yeah,
No.
That's amazing. So it can feel like the tendons moving in your arm and knows that, okay, I just made a fist.
Yeah, and you set up, or depending on the nature of your mobility issue, I guess you get someone else to set up for you. It depends. But because you can always use things like voice commands and so on, you can do it.
Yeah.
It's astonishing to an extent what you can do. And to give some fair play to them, Google has some play in this, but I will say I think Apple has actually done a fair bit more over the years. You can do quite a bit with a lot of their devices with voice.
They've always been ahead of the game.
Assistive gestures and things like this.
Yeah.
But you set up and you tell it, right, I want these things to mean select, or pinches to mean this or whatever. So you set up the things that you need the Apple Watch in this case to do. And it'll do them. At the same time, while they brought in game controllers, for example, in the last version of iOS for people who just want to play video games, they're now actually going to switch over to allowing that for full iOS control, which means if you've got that astonishing Xbox, I think it's the adaptive controller, the big board one that's designed to cover a whole range of ability issues, you'd be able to use that with an iOS or an iPadOS device for full control, which again, it's really cool tech to see and really cool integration to see between companies. To detail real challenges that people have. This isn't just we're about selling more hardware. It's we want to make our hardware more accessible and more useful to people generally.
Or are they identifying a new market, Alex? Like, per your conspiracy, this is like, selling to people who may not have purchased a watch before. I'm just saying.
You could have a point. Maybe Apple wants to sell some hardware. I think I heard that somewhere before.
Yeah, somewhere before, maybe very, very recently. I would like to. I thought that was really interesting. The stuff about clench your fist to sort of select things and how it can identify small movements and stuff. If we could, if it could identify when you start to get angry and can start taking your blood pressure and stuff when you start making a fist, then we could have like a completely new system.
It looks like you're about to make a punch, Jen. Would you like some help with that?
Well, it's like fall detection, except for like, angry rage fist detection. I like it.
It could like stop you from tweeting because you've got like these clenched fists.
It just shuts down Twitter and Facebook automatically. I'm saving you from yourself.
Well, they have the whole new it's not Automator anymore. It's a shortcuts thing coming in macOS Monterey.
Exactly.
I'm sure I could hack your Mac specifically to make that happen.
I would really appreciate that. Thank you. When the lockdown happens because of some people in the Sunshine Coast, they'll see me clenching a fist and then, just shut it down.
Well, that just about wraps up another episode of Vertical Hold. Thanks to Jen for joining us for this week's show.
Pleasure.
And Jen, you've been on the show many, many times before, so you know the 3 questions that are coming after you. Or, to be accurate, you know 2 of them because we answered the other one correctly last week. Finally. Took a while. So, where can people find your work online? Where can people find your social media online? And the big contentious question, what's the best sitcom of all time?
Oh, that's harsh. Okay. So you can find my work online across News Corp mastheads like the Courier Mail and the Daily Telly and the Herald Sun and all those sorts of places. Socially, you can find me on Twitter at Jen Dudley, hopefully not being angry because I've made a fist and all of a sudden I'm not allowed to tweet anymore. And the best sitcom of all time, I'm not going to say Hey Dad. I'm going to go American, and because this is my thing, I'm going to say The Office, American style. Not the first episode where they just did a copy of the British version, but all episodes after that, particularly the one around the dinner party.
You should go on some kind of quiz program about that.
It's a really good idea.
And as always, you can catch us online at Vertical Hold AU on Twitter, at verticalhold.com.au on the web, or via the Vertical Hold Facebook page.
And once again, thanks everyone for tuning in. Don't forget to tell your friends about us, put out the good word, and help us reach more people in 2021. Vertical Hold is proudly brought to you by Aussie Broadband, changing the game with their award-winning network and Australian-based support.
What have you done?
I'm just unwell. It's just a head cold chest thing.
You're not allowed to have those anymore. I'm sorry.
No.
You're going to have to turn that off.
I know it's against the rules, but I have had so much honey and lemon this week that I'm in danger of becoming a queen bee, basically.
Nice.